This is your typical Western teenager from the 90s. He plays basketball, is obsessed with the Chicago Bulls, Air Maxes, and Michael Jordan. He goes to prestigious schools in Switzerland, takes trips to Disneyland, speaks several languages, and enjoys all the accomplishments and values of Western civilization. His classmates know him as Kun, and so modest and well-educated, he becomes the leader of a small country. He promises to improve the lives of ordinary people, launches grand construction projects, and the world learns his real name, Kim Jong Un. Then comes his real achievements. He built reliable nuclear defenses for his country, and for himself unlimited power, for which he'll do anything. Take down his own uncle in any opposition, close the borders tighter than any of his predecessors, and strangle any information about the Western world, the very world in which he grew up and was raised. And today, North Korea is a land of absolute secrecy. It's almost impossible to escape from there. But the paradox is that those who do still feel proud of their homeland even as they flee it. Why does a country constantly under sanctions and sometimes unable to feed its own people build atomic weapons? Why didn't the DPRK collapse like the Soviet Union or the regimes in Eastern Europe, but also never opened up to Western capitalists like China or Vietnam? And the most important question, how has Kim Jong Un managed to hold on to power so tightly that 25 million North Koreans can hardly remember anyone but the Kim Dynasty ever ruling their nation? Korea, the Democratic People's Republic, has existed for 74 years. That's already 5 years longer than the United Powerful. But notice this. In the Soviet Union, several generations managed to rule the country, while in Korea during the same period, only 3 people have been in charge: Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il, and now Kim Jong-un. As their shared last name makes clear, they're related. Grandfather, father, and son. So it's obvious right away that North Korea isn't really about communism, or the power of the people, or even the rule of the party. This is a personal regime run by a single family. And for all these 75 years, this family has one way or another kept a nation of millions under its control. Now, let's rewind exactly 70 years. This is how American planes dropping bombs with no restraint leveled the capital of North Korea, Pyongyang, to the ground.
900 tons of bombs rained down on a 20-square-mile area. Before the bombardier signals, mission accomplished.
How many bombs did they drop? It's hard to even grasp the number. Was it a lot or little? The correct answer is a lot. During the 3 years of the Korean War, some 200,000 bombs were dropped on Pyongyang alone. Roughly 1 for every resident. And then there's the older man, Curtis LeMay. When he was in charge of the US Air Force's Strategic Command, he later reported that his pilots burned down every house in North Korea. Later, he even complained to his superiors that he was running out of targets. They destroyed every dam, flooded rivers, and wiped out the crops. People familiar with history are probably thinking, wait a minute, wasn't it North Korea that attacked the South first? If the US troops hadn't intervened, Kim Il-sung would have just taken over the entire Korean peninsula with his army. Yeah, you're right, that's exactly how it happened. For those who don't know, here's a quick recap. After World War II, Korea was split in two. In the north, the communists. In the south, pro-American allies. On June 25th, 1950, North Korean troops invaded the south and captured 90% of it, except for this small section around the port of Busan. American troops, along with the UN, helped the south, launched a counteroffensive, and almost captured the north themselves, destroying everything in their path with airstrikes. China and the USSR didn't want American imperialists riding their borders, so they stepped in directly. The war returned where it started, the boundary along the 38th parallel. By 1953, both sides were exhausted and signed an armistice. From that moment to this day, there have been 2 countries on the map, North and South Korea. Over the years, the US has poured money, technology, and protection into the South, while China and the Soviet Union provided the same support to North Korea. All this time until 1994, the country was ruled by one man, Kim Il-sung. But he didn't just transform himself from a military leader into a great leader. In the style of Stalin, Korean propaganda raised him to the status of the son of the nation, and in effect, made him into a god for North Korea. How did he manage that? Remember how I started with American planes burning the whole country to the ground, and how people literally had to hide underground to survive the bombings? Let's be honest, you really can't call that a victory. Why not? Because that's exactly what Kim Il-sung did. Right there on the ruins of his own capital, he held a military parade and celebrated victory in the war. The very war he himself started by attacking his neighbor. But it's okay, the Soviet Union was ready to foot the bill with generous aid. Engineers, architects, and consultants from friendly communist countries poured into Korea. helping in every area of public life. They rebuilt the DPRK, and it even began to develop faster than its southern neighbor, and Kim Il-sung's authority grew. As a new city sprung up, by the way, take a look, it looks just like East Berlin and Moscow. Pyongyang's TV tower is the Berlin one, and then there's the Ostankino. Try telling them apart. This model socialist urban paradise was built in a country where not long before, 80% of the people were peasants. Of course, they were amazed and happy. And amid all this patriotic noise, Kim Il-sung dealt with the opposition and established his own personality cult. The cult of the father of the nation. And here's the key point, which propaganda in every country has always used with relish. The idea of care. Just so you understand, Pyongyang lost about 1 million people during the Korean War. That's a lot in a country with only 10 million. Imagine how many orphan children there were.
Kids are the ones who always suffer most. They never know what's going on or why. And how can you explain to them after they've just seen their whole family get killed?
What did Kim Il-sung do? He ordered the construction of orphanages and schools for the children of martyrs for the motherland. The orphans were clothed, fed, educated, and cared for, but raised to believe that their new father was Kim himself. A vivid example is the Mangyong Day School for children of revolutionaries and orphans. It was opened in the place where Kim Il-sung was born, and its graduates would go on to become the future elite of the armed forces and state security service. In other words, the leader was strategically raising those he would later rely on. But the truth is, today's North Korean regime is also built on information technology. Just 10 years ago, at the very start of Kim Jong Un's rule, Seoul was registering 155 million hacking attempts from North Korea every hour. Around 17 every second. Between 2016 and 2018, North Korean hackers looted global cryptocurrency exchanges for more than $1 billion. Clearly, even a country like North Korea can't function without skilled IT specialists. Now take a closer look at those propaganda paintings, mosaics, and statues of Kim Il-sung. In them, he is portrayed not just as a father, but also a loving mother. See how he tenderly embraces children, wounded soldiers, peasants, and the elderly. This is no accident. There are the very values of which any religion, cult, or sect are built. It tries to replace the family. Coincidence? I don't think so. Kim Il-sung's father was a school teacher, and his mother was a daughter of a school principal. Both were active Christians in Eastern Korea. Here's another detail. Kim Il-sung's idol was Joseph Stalin, who himself once studied in a seminary in his youth, only to go on and build a frankly religious personality cult in an atheist state. I'm not trying to say that all children of teachers and preachers turn into Stalins or Kim Il-sungs. It's just that both clearly understood what they were building. What I'm suggesting is the ideal dictatorship is made from just such a mix. Let's dig deeper. Why does the state try to replace the family? Family means care. That's what Kim Il-sung does for everyone, or at least claims to. But family also means security. And that's where the nuclear weapons issue and the desire to acquire them come in. Think back to those brutal American bombings. As bad as they were, there was an even worse outcome. Not hundreds of thousands of regular bombs, but a few nuclear warheads, as happened to Japan. You've surely heard of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and seen the photos of those cities after a single explosion.
The Commercial Museum was also within 2/10 of a mile of 0 point, and the garden wall facing the blast was bent inward by the push of the explosion.
By the way, it was American nuclear threats that basically halted the Korean War. Kim Il-sung understood very well that at any moment, the Americans could do exactly to him what they did to Japan. And, as recent events showed, you can't always count on allies to respond quickly, which is why Kim sent his scientists off for knowledge and training to Dubna, near Moscow, to the Joint Institute for Nuclear Research. There, people from Albania, Bulgaria, Hungary, Vietnam, Germany, and Korea all worked together. And in 1964, up in North Korea's Yongbyon with Soviet help, they established their own nuclear science research center and even installed a Soviet reactor. But this was still not a bomb, and Moscow was in no hurry to hand over all the necessary tech. Just 2 years prior, in 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis happened. The Americans placed nuclear missiles in Turkey near the Soviet border, and in response, the USSR put missiles in Cuba. The US didn't like that. They blockaded the island, and for 2 weeks, the entire world waited for a nuclear war to break out between the USSR and the US. But President Kennedy and General Secretary Khrushchev came to an agreement. The Soviets removed their missiles from Cuba. The Americans took theirs out of Turkey. The deal went through and the war was averted. It was good for everyone, except North Korea. Because there, they finally understood, if it serves their own interests, the USSR wouldn't hesitate to sacrifice its allies. So waiting for help was pointless. They would have to develop nuclear and all other weapons themselves. North Korea's share of its national budget devoted to the military-industrial complex shot up from 4 to 5% in 1956 to 30% by 1966. And what happened next? The saved people of North Korea began thinking of Kim as practically a saint. He defended the country, won the war, united the people, fed them when there was famine and disease, and now there were hospitals and clinics on every corner. At least so it seemed in Pyongyang. It sounds like I'm talking about North Korea half a century ago, but things would get so much more difficult. The USSR collapsed, China moved closer to the West, aid dried up, Kim Il-sung died, and the terrible famine of the 90s began. But even in these dire circumstances, the Kims would stay in power. There are plenty of myths about North Korea. They say people still eat grass there, and that officials are supposedly executed with rockets and machine guns just for watching the wrong movies. The more monstrous the lie, the easier it is to believe. Throw in some bizarre videos, people crying when their leaders appear, applauding like robots, and it's easy to buy into any wild story about the DPRK. But in reality, the Kim regime is highly calculating. Otherwise, there's no way it would have lasted this long. Look at the 90s. When there was a terrible famine and most North Koreans looked emaciated, they waited in vain for help from the collapsed USSR or the now half-capitalist China. Eventually, the UN started sending humanitarian aid, with the main donors being the US and South Korea. In other words, their official enemies. But even that wasn't enough. The North Korean government was forced to allow some private trade. Improvised markets appeared. Smuggling flourished. As they say, if you're drowning, saving yourself is up to you. The state factory shut down. Men showed up to work just for form's sake and earned almost nothing, while their wives became the real breadwinners. Tradition said women should stay home, but with no way to feed their kids, they went to the markets. Private business started to grow, but too much growth was risky. The regime could fall apart just as it did in the USSR. So the second Kim Jong Un, made the smart move to hold on to power. He bet on the military and launched the Sungun policy, military first. There were two reasons. First, North Korea has more soldiers than even Russia, despite having 5 times fewer people and a territory 142 times smaller. If the military lives badly, they could topple the regime. Second, Kim Jong Un had just taken power after his father's death and needed to build his own authority. The army didn't really respect him. Not because he looked strange, wore platforms, or had glasses, but simply because he'd never had any real military experience. To keep the military from eating him alive, along with expired rations, Kim Jong Un raised defense spending, made soldiers first in line for subsidies and food distribution. It's a logical calculation. For example, why pour colossal sums into a fantastically expensive nuclear program? It's a way to avoid Gaddafi's fate. Muhammad Gaddafi, leader of Libya, was overthrown during a civil war. NATO intervened, Gaddafi was killed. The lesson: if you don't have nuclear deterrence, they can overthrow and destroy you at any moment. Obviously, nowadays, Kim Jong Un isn't going to launch nuclear weapons first. That'd be suicide. The US would strike back without hesitation. But having a stockpile of nuclear-tipped missiles that could in theory reach Washington, that's an argument to keep the US out of North Korea's internal affairs. There's no better means of protection than a hydrogen bomb, and a way to deliver it. The second argument is always propaganda. Kim Jong Un persuades his people. Look how strong and advanced we've become under my leadership, and it's only thanks to me that you're all safe. There's a kind of universal theory. Nearly any government can preserve itself indefinitely if it has 3 solid pillars. First, being needed by ordinary people. In North Korea, propaganda fills this role. It tells grandiose tales about great leaders, about external enemies who are just waiting to destroy Korea, and about leaders who protect everyone. The second pillar is the military, and it's crucial that the top brass live well. The Kims aren't fools. Remember the spending on the military-industrial complex and the special privileges for high-ranking officers. And the third pillar is big business. You might ask, what kind of business could there be in North Korea? Here's what. Under Kim Jong Un, when he had to loosen his grip a bit, a new class appeared, the Donju, or masters of money. High-ranking party officials, head of state companies, those working abroad, top security officers, even those wives who ran private trade. All these people have enough money to live well. And notice we're not talking about North Korean won, but real American dollars. This group thinks the Kim regime is a guarantee of their comfortable life. And Kim needs them too, because they're the ones who finance the regime and kick back a share from their businesses. Here's a simple example. Everyone makes fun of the national airline Air Koryo. It flies old Il-62s, is rated the world's worst carrier, has just one flight a day. But inside North Korea, Air Koryo runs a taxi service, a chain of gas stations, a travel agency, and even manufactures cigarettes and canned goods under its brand, all with approval from the top. It's a kind of public-private partnership. The government offloads the worries of production, logistics, and sales, but still controls everything and takes a healthy cut of the profits. According to the South Korean intelligence estimates, there are 33 Kim Jong Un residences in North Korea, 28 of which have their own railway stations. The residences are surrounded by multiple layers of fencing connected by underground tunnels. Naturally, there are bunkers where the leader can hide in case of an attack. And now look at this. In 2018, the famous developer and 45th President of the United States, Donald Trump, showed Kim Jong Un a slide presentation during their meeting. The message was simple. Comrade Kim, we're ready to give you and your country every opportunity for Western investment and capitalism. We'll invest so much that your Pyongyang could be as nice as Miami. If you want, it could be like China or Vietnam, the party in charge, but the economy runs entirely on capitalist rails. Or we can make it like Japan, the world's third largest economy, and we control them too. They have a constitutional monarchy. You'd have a similar role, just without the missiles. It was a tempting offer, one many agreed to, even those who already had nuclear weapons. But Kim Jong Un already enjoys this very luxury, and he understands perfectly well. The only guarantee for the survival of himself, his family, and his system is nuclear weapons. Giving them up provides no guarantee at all. Billionaire business sharks would devour him and his inner circle in just a few years. Kim Jong Un himself was born in 1982, old enough to remember the late 80s, the collapse of the USSR, the fall of the communist regimes in Eastern Europe. Plus, he studied in Switzerland, so he was familiar with Western values and knew how the world worked from the inside. Remember how I said that young Kim was obsessed with basketball and Chicago Bulls? Hardly anyone in the US knew what to expect from the chubby guy with the weird haircut. The Obama administration tried to initiate a dialogue through basketball diplomacy. They offered to invite Michael Jordan himself to Pyongyang. He declined, with a diplomatic explanation. Supposedly, he's afraid of flying on airlines like that.
One of the most iconic images ever of Air Jordan.
But someone who was always open to outrageous ideas agreed. Dennis Rodman. In the end, he flew to Pyongyang several times, not just playing basketball with Kim, but drinking with him, and even singing him happy birthday in a sense.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday.
Basketball diplomacy did work. The world saw Americans weren't being shot on arrival, and North Koreans played basketball. But on the whole, for both countries, it was just a show for their home audiences. After a few more rounds of friendship and showy gestures, things between Rodman and Kim fizzled out. There was never any real sincerity. So here's the main question. Why does anyone even need Kim Jong Un or his country? North Korea ranks dead last in any global rating. And it only matters as a threat that sooner or later the world feels needs to be eliminated. Kim Jong Un and his predecessors did everything right to stay in power. They got rid of internal rivals, invented a flexible ideology, built an effective nuclear shield, and formed a circle of people who are deeply invested in keeping the Kim dynasty at the helm. This fits that famous phrase, let a few get rich first. Do you know who said that? Deng Xiaoping, the Chinese leader who started sweeping reforms and made his country a world economic power. But there's a part of that phrase that people often forget. Let a few get rich first, but eventually everyone should prosper. The talent of the perfect dictator is precisely in making sure that never happens. You have to keep scaring the wealthy that without you, they'll be poor again. And you can't let the poor get rich or learn about their rights. Otherwise, they'll want power for themselves.